My mother started slipping castor oil into my prenatal smoothies and calling my OB to cancel appointments when she found out I was pregnant with my black boyfriend's baby. By my 6th month, she called CPS with false reports, had security remove Marcus from our ultrasound appointment, and even pushed me down the stairs while someone filmed. I waited until her vow renewal, with 200 guests, to stand up 7 months pregnant and play every recording of her saying she'd rather see me dead than have a mixed grandchild. My mother started her campaign like it was her personal mission. Monday, she slipped castor oil in a prenatal smoothie. Wednesday, she called my OB pretending to be me canceling appointments. Friday, she threw away my prenatal vitamins and replaced them with regular ones. The pharmacy probably recognized her voice better than her own husband did. Things got worse as my first trimester turned into my second, and her attempts went from sneaky to actually dangerous. First, she called my job and said I was using substances while pregnant. HR made me take a substance test right away, even though I was clean, but people had already started whispering about me. Weeks later during my baby shower, she called CPS about an unfit mother. A social worker showed up with cops ready to investigate and found me opening gifts with 30 guests. The caseworker didn't find anything, but she went on Facebook saying I was probably unfit. The worst thing happened in my 5th month when I had Braxton Hicks contractions at her house. She called 911 and said I was overdosing. Paramedics showed up ready for a substance emergency and found me having normal pregnancy symptoms. EMT Rodriguez said something about her false reports, but nothing happened to her. She started scheduling family dinners during my prenatal appointments on purpose. Other relatives told me she kept notebooks full of reasons why I shouldn't have this baby with dates and everything. She actually bragged to people about knowing how to handle situations like mine. Everything went crazy on a Tuesday in my 6th month when I got a letter from her lawyer wanting custody rights. She said I was an unfit mother even though the baby wasn't even born yet. I tried to talk to her like a normal person, but she said she'd add defamation to the lawsuit. That same day, my boyfriend Marcus came to our first ultrasound to find out the gender. While we were quietly looking at our healthy baby boy, she called security about a dangerous black man in the building. Security surrounded us, and both Marcus and I were terrified. The ultrasound tech was so upset she started crying. The doctor said he'd never seen anything like it in 20 years. I held Marcus while he asked why my own mother hated him and our son. That night, I saw her vow renewal invitations online, and the event talked about celebrating family values. I spent the next week looking at the guest list and realized she'd invited everyone important. She'd hired a fancy event planner and paid for catering, which meant she wanted the perfect image. Her invitations kept talking about how family and tradition meant everything. I figured out her vow renewal was her weak spot since she needed everyone's approval to maintain her reputation. Every relative coming to celebrate was a chance to show them what she'd really been doing. I made a group chat and found out she'd been telling lies to 5 other family members about me. We looked up the harassment laws and found out what she was doing was totally illegal. Recording her attempts to harm my pregnancy was completely legal and protected. Figured out her schedule and got the other relatives to help me document everything. Her first attempt that week started at 9 when she put something in my orange juice. My cousin filmed while I poured it out, and she screamed that I was wasting food. My mother texted everyone saying I was mentally unstable, but 3 relatives saw her grinding pills. The next week, I scheduled my glucose test during her book club, and she mysteriously showed up. We recorded her telling the nurse I had gestational diabetes when I didn't. When she had 5 church friends coming for Thursday dinner, we all wore body cameras. Spent the whole meal talking about mixed babies while Marcus sat right there. Her texts got more and more desperate as people started noticing her behavior. First she wrote, "Please stop, then I'll drop everything. Then I'm begging you." We just kept documenting and protecting my pregnancy. Sunday came with her biggest attempt yet, and she completely lost it. She pushed me down the stairs, but my cousin caught it all on video. The relatives who saw it asked my father about what was happening. I told them calmly that she'd been trying to hurt my baby for 6 months just because Marcus is black. Memorial Day weekend was her vow renewal with 200 guests in attendance. My mother wore white lace and smiled like the perfect wife and mother. My father stood beside her glowing with pride about their 30 years together. The pastor asked if anyone wanted to share memories before they renewed their vows. I stood up 7 months pregnant with Marcus beside me and my phone connected to the venue's speaker system. First recording played of her saying she'd rather see me dead than with a black baby. The room went completely silent as recording after recording filled the ballroom. Her face went from white to red as her own voice echoed saying the N-word about my unborn son. The microphone screeched with feedback as 200 wedding guests watched my mother's perfect facade crumble. Her sister Helen lunged for the microphone, but Marcus blocked her path while I played the next recording. My mother's voice filled the ballroom explaining how she'd been putting castor oil in my smoothies to trigger a miscarriage. Gasps erupted from the crowd as relatives who believed her lies finally heard the truth. Linda grabbed a champagne flute and hurled it at the speaker system, but missed completely. The glass shattered against the wall as she screamed that I was destroying her life. 3 of Robert's brothers moved to restrain her when she tried to charge at me. The pastor stepped back from the altar with his hands raised, shaking his head in disgust at what he was witnessing. The recordings kept playing. Her voice echoed through the venue, admitting she called CPS with false reports. Then came the audio of her telling the 911 dispatcher I was overdosing when I only had Braxton Hicks contractions. Security footage from the ultrasound appointment played on the venue's screens, showing her calling security on Marcus for being black in the building. Robert stood frozen at the altar as recording after recording exposed 6 months of harassment. His face went from confusion to horror as he heard his wife plotting to destroy our pregnancy. When the video of her pushing me down the stairs played, he stumbled backward and gripped the altar for support. Tears streamed down his face as he finally understood what Linda had been doing behind his back. Linda broke free from the men restraining her and grabbed the microphone from the DJ booth. He started ranting about protecting family values and how interracial relationships were destroying America. The venue staff cut her microphone, but she kept screaming, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. She pointed at my belly and yelled that she'd never accept a mixed grandchild. Rachel stood up from her table and walked to the front, pulling out her own phone. She connected it to the sound system and played recordings of Linda calling her, trying to recruit her into the harassment campaign. Then Aunt Teresa did the same, sharing voicemails where Linda begged her to help sabotage my pregnancy. Uncle James followed with text messages showing Linda's detailed plans to induce a miscarriage. The wedding coordinator tried to restore order, but guests were already leaving in disgust. Some relatives confronted Linda directly, demanding to know how she could do this to her own daughter. Others surrounded me protectively, apologizing for believing her lies. The photographer kept taking pictures, documenting the complete destruction of Linda's carefully crafted image. Robert finally moved, walking slowly toward me with tears streaming down his face. He reached out to touch my belly gently, then pulled me into a hug while Marcus stood guard. He whispered apologies over and over, saying he should have seen what was happening. He admitted he knew Linda was concerned about the pregnancy, but had no idea about the extent of her campaign. Linda's rage exploded when she saw Robert embracing me. She knocked over the wedding cake and threw centerpieces while screaming that we'd all betrayed her. Hotel security arrived and tried to escort her out, but she fought them every step. She clawed at the security guards and bit one of them, forcing them to call the police for backup. While we waited for the police, I showed Robert the folder of evidence we compiled. His hands shook as he read through the documentation of every attempt to harm his grandchild. He saw the falsified medical reports, the recorded calls to my workplace, coordinated harassment campaign. Each page made him sink deeper into his chair. The police arrived and took statements from dozens of witnesses. They reviewed the security footage and recordings, their expressions growing more serious with each piece of evidence. Linda tried to claim I'd doctored everything, but the sheer volume of witnesses and documentation made her lies obvious. They arrested her for assault after she attacked the security guard. As they led Linda away in handcuffs, she kept screaming that she was protecting her family from contamination. Even facing arrest, she couldn't stop her rants about my unborn son. The officers had to physically carry her to the police car while she kicked and screamed. 200 guests watched the woman who'd preached about family values reveal her true nature. Robert sat in the ruins of his vow renewal, surrounded by overturned chairs and scattered flowers. He told me he'd been married to Linda for 30 years, but felt like he'd never really known her. He pulled out his phone and called his brother, asking if he could stay there for a while. The man who stood proudly beside his wife an hour ago now couldn't even look at her empty place at the altar. Marcus held me as the adrenaline crash hit. There's something strange about how Linda went from sneaking castor oil into smoothies to full-blown public meltdowns. What made her think she could keep escalating without anyone catching on? My hands shook as I realized it was finally over, that everyone knew the truth about what my mother had been doing. The baby kicked hard, probably responding to my stress, and I rubbed my belly to soothe him. We protected him from his grandmother's hatred, but the cost was watching my family shatter in front of 200 people. Rachel and Aunt Teresa helped me to a chair while Uncle James brought me water. They formed a protective circle around me, making sure I was okay after the confrontation. Other relatives approached one by one, apologizing for believing Linda's lies and promising to support me through the pregnancy. The family that Linda had tried to turn against me was now rallying to protect me from her. The venue staff started cleaning up the destruction, while guests filtered out in shock groups. Stopped to hug me or shake Marcus's hand, expressing their disgust at Linda's behavior. The pastor approached and blessed my pregnancy, saying no child should face such hatred before they're even born. He offered to testify if needed about what he witnessed. Robert returned from his phone call looking older than his 60 years. He asked if he could feel the baby kick, and I guided his hand to where his grandson was moving. Fresh tears fell as he felt the life Linda had tried to destroy. He promised to protect us both from her, no matter what it took. He said he'd already started thinking about divorce lawyers. As we prepared to leave the destroyed venue, I looked at the altar where my parents should have been renewing their vows. Instead of a celebration of 30 years of marriage, it had become the scene of Linda's complete exposure. The white roses she'd chosen so carefully were trampled on the floor, their petals scattered like the lies she'd been spreading for months. Marcus drove us home while I sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. The baby settled down as we left the chaos behind, his movements becoming gentle rolls instead of sharp kicks. I knew this was just the beginning of a long legal battle with Linda, but at least now everyone knew the truth. She couldn't hide behind her perfect mother image anymore. When we got home, my phone was already filling with messages from relatives who'd been at the vow renewal. Some shared their own recordings of Lynn's meltdown, while others offered support and apologies. The family group chat that Linda had used to spread lies about me was now full of people condemning her behavior and planning how to help me through the rest of my pregnancy. I sat on our couch with my hands on my belly, feeling my son move inside me. Despite everything Linda had tried, he was still here, still healthy, still loved. Marcus sat beside me and put his hand over mine, and we felt our baby together. We'd won this battle, but I knew Linda wouldn't give up easily. The real fight was just beginning. The next morning brought a pounding headache and 37 missed calls from Linda's phone. Marcus deleted them without letting me listen while I nursed a cup of decaf tea. My hands still trembled from the confrontation, and the baby seemed restless, shifting constantly as if he could sense my anxiety. Rachel arrived at noon with groceries and updates. I'd been fielding calls all morning from relatives who'd attended the vow renewal. Most were horrified by what they'd witnessed, but a few of Linda's church friends insisted we'd ambushed her unfairly. Rachel showed me screenshots of Linda's sister Helen defending her on social media, claiming we'd taken things out of context. That afternoon, Robert came by with 2 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes. He'd spent the night at his brother's house, unable to return to the home he'd shared with Linda for 3 decades. He sat at our kitchen table looking lost, explaining how he discovered Linda had been withdrawing large sums from their joint savings account over the past 6 months. The money had gone toward private investigators, legal consultations, and something called a family preservation fund that he couldn't trace. Marcus made coffee while Robert showed us bank statements. Nearly $30,000 had disappeared, all connected to Linda's campaign against our pregnancy. Some withdrawals matched dates when she'd hired people to follow us or paid for background checks on Marcus's family. Others corresponded with her failed legal threats and mysterious medical consultations. The doorbell rang that evening, and through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers. I needed additional statements about the assault at the venue and Linda's pattern of harassment. I spent 2 hours going through the timeline while they took notes, their expressions growing more concerned as the evidence mounted. They mentioned potential charges ranging from assault to stalking to filing false reports. Marcus held my hand as we explained the months of escalating behavior. The officers reviewed our documentation, particularly interested in the false 911 calls and CPS reports. They said Linda's actions constituted a clear pattern of harassment with racial motivation, which could elevate the charges. They took copies of everything and said a detective would follow up within the week. After they left, I couldn't stop shaking. The baby hadn't moved in over an hour, which which sent me into a panic. The emergency room, where they hooked me up to monitors. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the doctor insisted on keeping me overnight for observation. She said the stress was affecting both me and the baby, and I needed to find ways to protect myself from further trauma. Robert stayed with us at the hospital, pacing the halls like a caged animal. He made phone calls to lawyers, his voice echoing off the sterile walls as he began the process of protecting his assets from Linda. Between calls, he sat by my bed apologizing repeatedly, saying he should have recognized the signs of her obsession sooner. The next morning, my blood pressure had stabilized enough for discharge, but the doctor ordered modified bed rest. No more confrontations, no stress, just focusing on keeping myself and the baby healthy for the remaining weeks of pregnancy. Marcus took immediate leave from work, his employer understanding given the circumstances we documented. At home, I tried to follow doctor's orders, but Linda made that impossible. She'd been released on bail and immediately began a new campaign. First, she showed up at Marcus's workplace, causing a scene in the lobby until security removed her. His boss called to assure him his job was safe, but the humiliation stung. Then she targeted my support system. Rachel received threatening letters about choosing sides, betraying family. Aunt Teresa found her car tires slashed after publicly supporting me on social media. Uncle James discovered someone had called his employer claiming he was involved in substance stealing. Each attack was carefully crafted to avoid direct threats while maximizing damage. Catherine Mills, the attorney who'd agreed to take our case, worked quickly to file for an emergency restraining order. She said Linda's behavior since the arrest showed clear escalation and danger. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, but that felt like a lifetime away when every day brought new harassment. Marcus installed security cameras around our apartment after we found evidence someone had tried to pick our lock. The scratches on the door frame were fresh, and neighbors reported seeing Linda in the building despite not knowing our exact unit number. Building management increased security patrols and put her photo at all entrance desks. My cousin David called with disturbing news. He'd overheard Linda at their church telling people I was mentally unstable and had attacked her at the vow renewal. She was painting herself as a concerned grandmother trying to save an unborn child from dangerous parents. Some congregation members who hadn't attended the vow renewal were believing her version of events. The stress made sleep impossible. I'd lie awake feeling the baby move, wondering if he could sense the chaos surrounding his arrival. Marcus would rub my back and sing softly, trying to create moments of peace, but we both knew Linda wasn't finished. She'd lost her public image, but that only seemed to make her more dangerous. Thursday brought a new low. Linda had contacted my OBS office pretending to be me again, this time claiming I wanted to switch a home birth with no medical supervision. Fortunately, the staff recognized her voice from previous attempts and called to verify. My doctor was furious, threatening to involve law enforcement if the harassment continued. That same day, we learned Linda had hired a new lawyer, someone known for taking questionable cases. Sent a letter demanding grandparent visitation rights and questioning our fitness as parents. The letter cited my mental instability and Marcus's criminal background, a complete fabrication based on a track ticket from 5 years ago. Catherine responded swiftly, pointing out that grandparent rights didn't apply when the grandparent posed a danger to the child. She included documentation of Linda's racist statements and harassment campaign. Legal battle was officially beginning, and I was only 7.5 months pregnant. Robert's divorce lawyer uncovered more financial devastation. Linda had opened credit cards in both their names, maxing them out on legal fees and private investigators. She'd also been in contact with anti-miscegenation groups online, some of whom had donated to her cause. The paper trail revealed an obsession that went deeper than anyone had realized. Friday afternoon, I woke from a nap to find Marcus on the phone with camp security from his old college. One had called claiming he'd never graduated, trying to get his degree revoked. It was absurd, but it meant hours of Marcus providing documentation and dealing with bureaucracy. Robert's checking bank statements like he's solving a crime show mystery. $30,000 vanished into Linda's "Let's destroy my grandchild's life fund." That's enough money to buy a really nice car or really terrible judgment. Linda was trying to dismantle our lives piece by piece. Restraining order hearing arrived with me exhausted and 8 months pregnant. Linda showed up looking haggard but defiant, accompanied by her new lawyer. She prepared a counter case, claiming we defamed her and caused emotional distress. Her lawyer argued that a grandmother's concern for her grandchild shouldn't be criminalized. Catherine systematically destroyed their arguments. They presented the recordings, the false reports, the financial evidence of stalking, and witness statements from the vow renewal. When Linda's lawyer tried to minimize the RAC's comments as taken out of context, Catherine played the full recordings, leaving no doubt about Linda's motivations. The judge granted the restraining order immediately, setting strict boundaries. Linda couldn't come within 500 feet of me, Marcus, or our home. She was forbidden from contacting us directly or through third parties. Any violation would result in immediate arrest. Judge also recommended the prosecutor pursue criminal charges for the false reports and harassment. Linda's reaction was volcanic. She stood up screaming that the court was destroying families and promoting white genocide. Her lawyer tried to quiet her, but she shoved him aside, ranting about racial purity and traditional values. The bailiffs had to physically remove her while she screamed threats about taking her grandchild away from us. Inside the courthouse, Robert waited with tears in his eyes. He testified about discovering Linda's deception, his voice breaking as he chose his grandchild over his wife. He drove us home in silence, the weight of a shattered marriage heavy in the car. At our apartment, he hugged me carefully and promised to handle Linda so we could focus on the baby. That weekend passed quietly, a brief respite that felt suspicious in its calm. Marcus and I tried to nest, up the nursery and washing tiny clothes. But we both kept checking the security cameras, waiting for Linda to violate the restraining order. She'd never accepted boundaries before. Why would she start now? Monday morning justified our paranoia. Linda had spent the weekend recruiting flying monkeys, people who hadn't attended the vow renewal, and believed her victim narrative. My workplace received calls from concerned citizens reporting that I was abusing substances while pregnant. Former family friends left voicemails questioning if I was being manipulated by Marcus. Linda had found a way to harass us without direct contact. The baby seemed to sense my stress, moving frantically whenever these calls came in. My doctor warned that my blood pressure pressure was creeping up again, and I might need to deliver early if things didn't improve. The thought of giving birth while dealing with Linda's escalating behavior terrified me. Catherine began documenting the third-party harassment, building a case that Linda was violating the restraining order through proxies. Proving coordination was difficult when Linda was careful to communicate through channels we couldn't monitor. She'd learned from her mistakes, becoming more strategic in her attacks. Tuesday brought an unexpected ally. Helen, Linda's sister who'd initially defended her, called to apologize. She'd done her own investigation after the vow renewal and discovered Linda had been lying to everyone for months. She offered to testify about Linda's pattern of manipulation and control that predated my pregnancy by years. Helen revealed that Linda had exhibited controlling behavior toward other family members who stepped outside her narrow worldview. Cousin who'd married someone from a different religion had faced similar, though less extreme, harassment. A niece who'd chosen a non-traditional career had been subjected to Linda's campaigns of correction. A pregnancy had simply triggered her most extreme response. Robert filed for divorce that week, citing irreconcilable differences and Linda's criminal behavior. Linda responded by accusing him of abandonment and demanding alimony. She claimed her actions were those of a devoted wife and mother, trying to protect her family from a terrible mistake. The divorce proceedings promised to be as contentious as everything else. Wednesday morning, I experienced strong contractions that sent us rushing to the hospital. The stress had triggered premature labor at 35 weeks. The medical team worked to stop the contractions, while I sobbed, terrified of delivering early because of Linda's harassment. Marcus held my hand, while nurses administered medication to calm my uterus. The contractions slowed but didn't stop completely. I was admitted for monitoring and possible early delivery. The doctor explained that, while 35 weeks wasn't ideal, the baby would likely be fine if we couldn't stop labor. She recommended staying calm, but how could I relax knowing Linda was still out there plotting? That night, as I lay in the hospital bed, feeling my son's movements, a nurse mentioned security had turned away someone claiming to be my mother. Linda had violated the restraining order by attempting to enter the maternity ward. Security had her photo and called the police, but she'd fled before they arrived. Even facing arrest, she couldn't stay away. The violation triggered immediate legal action. A warrant was issued for Linda's arrest, and Catherine pushed for expedited criminal charges. The prosecutor, seeing the pattern of escalation and the danger to a pregnant woman, agreed to pursue multiple felony charges, including aggravated stalking and witness intimidation. Thursday passed in a blur of medical monitoring and legal updates. The contractions had stopped, but I remained on strict bed rest in the hospital. Marcus never left my side, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair and jumping at every sound in the hallway. We both knew Linda was desperate enough to try anything. Robert visited daily, bringing news from the outside world. Linda had gone into hiding after the warrant was issued, but her digital footprint revealed continued obsession. She joined more online hate groups, seeking advice on protecting bloodlines and preventing racial mixing. Members encouraged increasingly extreme actions, feeding her delusions. Friday afternoon, the police called with good news and bad news. They'd arrested Linda at a motel 40 miles away, but she'd been found with disturbing materials. She had detailed plans of the hospital layout, our home address, and had researched how to forge medical documents. She'd been playing something, though they caught her before she could act. The arrest made local news. When arrested for stalking pregnant daughter over interracial relationship, became a headline that destroyed any remaining reputation Linda had. Our story went viral in Atlanta, with people expressing shock that such blatant racism still existed. The attention was overwhelming when all I wanted was peace to have my baby. Saturday brought more contractions, and this time they couldn't be stopped. At 35.5 weeks, my body had decided it was time. Marcus called everyone, while nurses prepared for delivery. I was terrified but also strangely relieved. Once the baby was born, Linda's fantasy of preventing his existence would be shattered forever. Robert arrived as they wheeled me to delivery, tears streaming down his face. He promised to stand guard, to make sure Linda couldn't somehow interfere even from jail. The extended family members who'd supported us gathered in the waiting room, creating a protective barrier of love around us. Labor progressed quickly, as if my body was eager to bring this child into the world, despite everything. Marcus never let go of my hand, whispering encouragement and promises of the beautiful life we'd give our son. Between contractions, I thought about how different the moment was from what I'd imagined, surrounded by security and legal protections instead of just joy. As transition approached, a nurse mentioned there had been multiple calls to the hospital asking about my condition. It followed protocol, releasing no information, but it was clear Linda had found a way to monitor the situation even from jail. Her network of flying monkeys was still active, still reporting back to her. But in that delivery room, none of it mattered. The only thing that existed was bringing our son safely into the world. Marcus counted through contractions, while I focused on the life we'd fought so hard to protect. This baby would be born into chaos, but also into fierce love and protection. The final stage of labor arrived with the sun setting outside. 8 months of harassment, threats, and violence had led to the moment. As I prepared to push, I felt a strange sense of power. Linda had tried everything to prevent this birth, and she had failed. Our son would be born healthy and loved, despite her hatred. Marcus looked into my eyes as the doctor announced it was time. We were about to meet the child Linda had called an abomination, the grandchild she'd rejected before he even existed. He would have parents who'd fought for him, a grandfather who'd chosen love over hate, and a community that had rallied to protect him. The pushing phase began with determination flooding through me. Each contraction brought us closer to victory over Linda's campaign of hate. Marcus whispered that he could see our son's head, that he had dark hair like his father. I pushed harder, knowing that Linda's worst nightmare was about to become our greatest joy. The pushing phase intensified with each contraction. Marcus counted steadily, while I focused on bringing our son into the world. The doctor announced she could see the head crowning, and suddenly everything felt more real than the past 8 months of chaos. One final push and David Robert entered the world at 6 pounds, 8 ounces, his cry piercing through the delivery room. Linda's hospital layout plans and fake document research make me wonder if she actually believed she could somehow stop a birth that was already happening. The timing of David's arrival at 35 weeks seems almost like the baby himself decided enough was enough with all this drama. Marcus cut the cord with shaking hands while nurses cleaned our son and checked his vitals. Despite being slightly early, David scored perfectly on his tests. Placed him on my chest and I felt the weight of him, real and warm and alive. Marcus leaned over us both, tears streaming down his face as he touched his son's tiny fingers. Robert waited outside the delivery room, pacing anxiously until a nurse invited him in. He approached slowly, as if afraid to disturb the moment. When I offered to let him hold David, he broke down completely, cradling his grandson while promising to protect him from Linda's hatred forever. The man who stood beside Linda just weeks ago at the vow renewal now stood firmly with us. That first night in the hospital passed peacefully. David latched well for feeding, and Marcus stayed awake watching us both, still processing that our son was finally here. The nurses mentioned increased security protocols were in place after Catherine's warning about Linda, though she remained in custody. Even from jail, her presence loomed over what should have been pure joy. The next morning brought visitors. Rachel arrived first with balloons and tears, followed by Aunt Teresa and Uncle James. Each of them held David carefully, marveling at his perfect features and promising to be the family Linda had tried to destroy. Marcus's parents drove through the night from Virginia, arriving exhausted but eager to meet their first grandchild. Catherine called with updates about Lynn's case. The prosecutor had added federal charges based on the hate crime evidence, and Linda faced serious prison time. She'd been denied bail after the judge reviewed her escalating behavior and the materials found during her arrest. Preliminary hearing was set for the following month, giving us time to adjust to parenthood before facing her in court again. On our third day in the hospital, the social worker from CPS visited. She'd been assigned to close out the false reports Linda had filed, documenting the pattern of harassment for the criminal case. She held David briefly, shaking her head at how Linda had weaponized their services against an innocent family. Her report would add weight to the prosecution case. Marcus handled the discharge paperwork while I dressed David in his going-home outfit. The tiny clothes seemed impossibly small, but he was perfect in them. Hospital security escorted us to our car, a precaution that felt both excessive and necessary given Linda's history. The drive home was surreal. Our son finally leaving the hospital Linda had tried to prevent him from ever reaching. Home, we found the apartment transformed. Robert had hired cleaners while we were gone, and Marcus's parents had stocked our freezer with prepared meals. The nursery we'd assembled during the chaos now held our actual baby. I settled into the rocking chair to feed David, while Marcus organized the mountain of supplies we'd accumulated. That first week blurred together in a cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of sleep. Robert visited daily, always bringing something useful, and staying just long enough to help without intruding. He'd moved into a furnished apartment near his brother, starting divorce proceedings while Linda awaited trial. The man I'd known my whole life was finally choosing his family over his wife's hatred. Catherine stopped by with paperwork for the extended restraining order. She needed documentation showing David's birth to ensure Linda could never legally approach him. The order would remain in effect regardless of her criminal trial outcome, protecting our son from his grandmother's poison. Marcus signed everything immediately, determined to build every possible barrier between Linda and our child. The pediatrician's first visit went smoothly. David was gaining weight appropriately despite his early arrival, hitting all his markers perfectly. The doctor knew our situation and took extra time explaining normal newborn behaviors, understanding we had enough stress without unnecessary worry. She promised to document everything carefully, creating a medical record that showed David thriving despite the circumstances of his birth. 2 weeks postpartum, I attended my follow-up appointment while Marcus stayed home with David. Body was healing well, though the doctor remained concerned about my stress levels. She prescribed mild anxiety medications safe for breastfeeding and strongly recommended therapy once I felt ready. The physical recovery was progressing, but the emotional toll would take longer to address. Helen called that afternoon with disturbing news. She'd been monitoring Linda's former social media accounts and discovered a network of supporters still active. They created a fund for her legal defense, spreading lies about government persecution of a concerned grandmother. Most donors didn't know the full story, contributing based on Linda's carefully crafted victim narrative. The FBI agent assigned to the hate crime charges visited to prepare our testimony. She reviewed the evidence methodically, building an airtight case that showed Linda's pattern of escalation. The federal charges carried mandatory minimums that would keep Linda in prison for years. She explained the difference between state and federal proceedings, preparing us for the long legal journey ahead. Marcus returned to work part-time after 3 weeks, his employer accommodating our need for flexibility. I stayed home with David, finding rhythm in our daily routines while remaining hypervigilant about security. Every delivery person was scrutinized, every unexpected visitor viewed with suspicion. Linda had trained us to see threats everywhere, a legacy that would take time to overcome. The victim advocate called to discuss the upcoming preliminary hearing. He offered to accompany us to court, providing support during what would be our first time seeing Linda since her arrest. I agreed immediately, knowing I'd need help facing my mother while protecting my newborn son. The advocate had experience with family violence cases and understood the complexity of confronting a parent who'd become a danger. Robert's divorce lawyer contacted us about testimony for those proceedings. Linda was contesting everything, claiming Robert had abandoned her during a mental health crisis. She wanted alimony, the house, and half his retirement despite spending tens of thousands on her harassment campaign. Lawyer assured us the criminal charges would impact the divorce settlement, protecting Robert's assets from funding more hatred. 3 weeks after David's birth, we received notice that Linda had been transferred to federal custody. The state charges would be handled first, followed by the federal hate crime prosecution. Her public defender had requested a psychiatric evaluation, likely searching for any defense against the mountain of evidence. Catherine warned us this was standard procedure, not a sign of weakness in our case. Marcus's mother extended her stay to help with David while we prepared for court. She'd taken leave from her job in Virginia, determined to support us through the legal proceedings. Having her presence meant we could attend hearings without worrying about childcare, though the thought of being away from David even briefly caused anxiety. The preliminary hearing arrived on a Thursday morning. I dressed carefully while Marcus prepared David's diaper bag, though he'd stay with his grandmother during the proceedings. Courthouse looked different in daylight, less imposing than during our restraining order hearing. Victim advocate met us at security, guiding us to a private waiting room away from Linda's supporters. When they brought Linda into the courtroom, I barely recognized her. Weeks in custody had aged her dramatically, her perfect appearance replaced by gray roots and orange jumpsuit. She scanned the gallery until finding me, her expression shifting from hope to rage when she saw I'd come to testify against her. The bailiff positioned himself between us, clearly briefed on the situation. The prosecutor presented evidence methodically. Recording after recording played through the courtroom speakers, Linda's voice filling the space with hatred. The security footage from various incidents showed her escalation clearly. When they played the video of her pushing me down the stairs while pregnant, several people in the gallery gasped. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Linda's public defender tried arguing, she'd been motivated by concern for her grandchild's welfare. Prosecutor destroyed this defense by playing Linda's racist rants from the vow renewal, her voice echoing through the courtroom calling her unborn grandson a contamination. The defender shifted tactics, suggesting mental illness, but the psychiatric evaluation found Linda competent to stand trial. The judge bound the case over for trial on all charges. Linda would remain in custody given the severity of the crimes and her history of violating court orders. To let her away, she turned toward me one final time. The hatred in her eyes hadn't dimmed despite everything she'd lost. She'd chosen racism over her grandson, and that choice had destroyed her life. Outside the courthouse, Robert waited on a bench looking exhausted. He testified about discovering Linda's financial deception and her escalating behavior. He asked to see a photo of David, studying his grandson's face on my phone screen. The divorce would be finalized within months. I think 30 years of marriage poisoned by hidden hatred. Back home, I nursed David while processing the hearing. Seeing Linda in custody had been both satisfying and heartbreaking. The mother who'd raised me was gone, replaced by someone consumed with hatred for her own grandson. Marcus held us both, creating the safe space Linda had tried to destroy. Our son would grow up surrounded by love, protected from his grandmother's poison. The preliminary hearing really showed Linda's greatest hits collection. Pushing her pregnant daughter downstairs on video, while the gallery gasped like they're watching a true crime show. The federal prosecutor called that evening with good news. Based on the state hearing and additional evidence, they were confident in their case. Linda faced a minimum of 3 years on federal charges alone, possibly more given the aggravating factors. Combined with state convictions, she'd likely serve at least 5 years. David would be in elementary school before she could even apply for parole. That night, I wrote in the journal I started for David. Someday, he'd need to understand why he had only one grandmother, why we had security cameras, why certain topics made his parents tense. But for now, he slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of the battle fought for his existence. Love had won, even if victory came with scars. The next months would bring more hearings, testimony, and legal procedures. But the immediate danger had passed. Linda sat in a cell while David grew stronger each day. The family she tried to tear apart had reformed without her, choosing love over hate. Our son would know his worth came not from the color of his skin, but from the content of his character. As I finished feeding David that night, Marcus played soft music while organizing the nursery. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight we were simply parents caring for our son. The monitors blinked steadily, the locks were secure, and David slept peacefully between us. We built our fortress of love, and Linda's hatred couldn't penetrate these walls. Interesting how they're still checking the monitors and locks even after hearing about Linda's sentence. Makes you wonder if that feeling of safety ever really comes back. Like the video, it helps more than you think.